I was driving to hear my son's last will and testament. But what my neighbor told me changed everything. We are continue. Please subscribe for new story. The morning was cold, gray, and silent. I remember gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white, my heart racing with a mix of anticipation and dread. Today was the day I would hear my son, Jacob's last will and testament. He had been ill for months, though he always insisted he was fine, brushing off every concern with a weak smile and a shrug. But the doctor had been clear. His time was short. As I stepped into my car, I noticed Mrs. Thompson, my next door neighbor, watering her roses. She waved, smiling politely, but something in her eyes, something uneasy, made me pause. Before I could start the engine, she called out, her voice trembling slightly. Wait. I think you should hear this first. I frowned. Hear what? Mrs. Thompson. She hesitated, glancing around as if afraid someone might be listening. It's about Jacob and the will. I overheard something I think you need to know before you go. A cold shiver ran down my spine. I had been imagining this moment for weeks, rehearsing what I might say, bracing myself for the pain of loss. But never had I imagined a secret like this. The revelation. She pulled me aside, lowering her voice. Jacob. He's been talking about more than just the will. He's changed his mind about a lot of things. And he wants to make sure you know something first. My chest tightened. Mrs. Thompson, what do you mean? She looked me in the eyes, her hands clutching the watering can as though it could anchor her. Jacob. He doesn't just want his possessions divided fairly. He wants revenge or justice. I think he's worried someone might take advantage of you if you don't know. Her words struck me like lightning. I blinked, trying to process them. Revenge. Justice. Jacob? My son. Yes, she said softly. I know it sounds strange, but he's been planning this for weeks. He wanted to make sure everything he's worked for, and everything he's leaving behind, goes to the right people. People who matter. He doesn't trust certain relatives. The drive to the lawyer, I started the engine with trembling hands. The streets blurred past me as I drove, my mind racing. Jacob. My little boy who once hugged me after every scraped knee, who spent hours telling me about imaginary adventures in the backyard, had grown into a man who planned his exit with precision and cunning. As I drove, I thought about the last time I saw him. He had been pale, frail, but his eyes had that familiar spark, determination. He had told me, almost jokingly, Dad, make sure you're not swindled. Some people think a will is just paper. It's not. It's power. I swallowed hard. Could my own family betray me after he was gone? Could I trust anyone? Unexpected encounters. Halfway to the lawyer's office, I passed the old corner cafe. Inside, I spotted Clara, Jacob's childhood friend, who now worked there. She waved, but her smile faltered when she saw me. I parked, stepped inside, and she approached hesitantly. Dad, she began, her voice soft. Jacob. He left something for you. Not in the will. Something he wanted you to see first. He asked me to make sure you got it if he didn't have time to tell you. My heart pounded. What is it? She reached into her bag and handed me a small, worn envelope. No words, no name, just my initials scrawled in Jacob's handwriting. I opened it carefully. Inside was a letter and a set of keys. The letter began, "Dad, if you're reading this, I'm gone. I know you might feel betrayed or confused by some of my decisions, but everything I've done was to protect you and to make sure the people who cared for me and for us are the ones who benefit. Don't trust appearances. Trust love and loyalty. Some people will try to take what isn't theirs. Be careful. And be strong." Tears stung my eyes. He had thought about me, even in his final days. He had known the world might try to cheat me. The lawyer's office. When I finally arrived at the lawyer's office, I realized I wasn't just nervous about the will. I was on edge, alert to every detail, every subtle glance. Family members were gathered, cousins, siblings, even a few of Jacob's friends. Some faces were smug, others nervous. The lawyer began reading the will. At first, it seemed ordinary: modest savings, a few sentimental items, and property distributed to family. But then came the twist. Jacob had left instructions for each inheritance to be conditional. The house would go to me, but only after the children who had been loyal to him were safely settled in school. The largest portion of his savings had been donated to charities that supported sick children, hospitals, and education. Relatives who had shown greed or indifference were explicitly excluded. And then, he had left a separate note for me, detailing secret accounts, hidden investments, and instructions on exposing family members who had tried to cheat him out of his inheritance. He had thought of everything. The neighbor's warning validated. Mrs. Thompson had been right. Jacob had wanted to protect me. He had seen the greed in the eyes of some relatives, the cunning in their smiles. By the time I finished reading the will, I realized something incredible. My son had used his last days not to amass wealth for himself, but to safeguard our family from dishonesty and to reward loyalty and love. And in that moment, I felt something I hadn't in months: pride, awe, and a deep, bittersweet love. The sweet justice. Weeks later, the relatives who had tried to manipulate the situation were quietly excluded. The charities flourished. Those who had loved and cared for Jacob, even in small ways, received his gifts. And me, I had the knowledge, the keys, and the letters, proof that my son, even in death, had thought of me, guided me, and protected me. I drove home one evening, past Mrs. Thompson's roses, past the cafes and streets of our small town. I held Jacob's letter in my hands and whispered, "Thank you, son. You were always smarter than me, and braver too." And in the quiet, I realized this: sometimes, a son's final gift isn't money or property. It's foresight, love, and the knowledge that he trusted you to do what is right. As I left the lawyer's office, letter and keys clutched tightly in my hands, a storm of emotions coursed through me: relief, pride, grief, and a strange mix of admiration and sorrow for the son who had planned every detail with the precision of a general. Jacob had thought of everything. except maybe how much this would hurt me to witness from the outside, as I pieced together the puzzle of his last intentions. The drive home was quiet, almost unnervingly so. The streets of our neighborhood, lined with golden autumn leaves, seemed different somehow, as if the world had shifted slightly while I was inside that office. Mrs. Thompson waved again from her garden, her smile knowing, almost conspiratorial. I nodded to her but said nothing. She had already told me what I needed to know. Her warning had been the first clue that Jacob's will was more than a simple legal document. At home, I spread the papers across the kitchen table, reading every line carefully. The wealth I had assumed would be mine, or at least partially mine, was gone. But Jacob hadn't left me empty-handed. He had left instructions, precise and meticulous, for everything I needed to do to protect myself from those who might take advantage of my grief. He had left warnings about distant cousins who had eyed his inheritance with greed, instructions for charitable distributions that would honor his memory, and even a small fund set aside for me, his father, to ensure I would live comfortably in my later years. It was a mixture of justice and foresight, and I felt a pang of regret for all the years I had worried about money, when my son had been thinking far beyond that. The next few days were a blur of phone calls, meetings, and clarifications. Relatives I hadn't seen in years reached out, some curious, some accusatory. Jacob had anticipated each one. I followed his instructions to the letter, and as I did, I realized something profound. My son, even in death, was teaching me a lesson about life, loyalty, and integrity. Those who had acted in bad faith were quietly excluded. Those who had loved and supported him were rewarded, and I, his father, had been entrusted with the responsibility to carry out his vision. One evening, exhausted from the endless paperwork and family politics, I sat alone in Jacob's old study. I picked up the letter again, reading his words, "Dad, be strong. Don't let anger or grief cloud your judgment. Love those who loved me, and protect yourself from those who didn't. Everything else will follow." I felt a lump in my throat. My son had trusted me not just with money, but with his last intentions, his legacy, and, in a way, with my own moral compass. Tears rolled down my face as I whispered, "I'll do it, son. I promise." The weeks that followed were a strange mixture of catharsis and quiet satisfaction. The charities flourished under the instructions Jacob had left, giving aid to children who were sick, schools that were underfunded, and families struggling to make ends meet. Friends of Jacob's, some I hadn't known, reached out to thank me, expressing how much he had thought about them even in his final days. I began to notice subtle shifts among the relatives who had tried to manipulate the situation. Their smiles faltered when they realized I had followed Jacob's plan exactly. There was no confrontation, no shouting, just the quiet realization that they had been outsmarted, not by me, but by Jacob himself. Mrs. Thompson came over one afternoon, a basket of fresh baked bread in her hands. She smiled as she handed it to me. "You've done right by him," she said softly. "He wou. He would be proud." I nodded, holding back tears. "I hope so," I said. He trusted me to do the right thing. Months passed. The house became a quiet sanctuary again. I took walks in the evening, often stopping by the park where Jacob used to play as a child. Sometimes, I imagined him there, a boy with endless curiosity, and I felt both his absence and his presence at the same time. It was a strange, comforting paradox. Then came the day when I received a letter from the largest charity Jacob had funded. Inside were photos, children smiling as they received new school supplies, hospital wings painted in bright colors, playgrounds built where none had existed. In the corner of every photo, I noticed his handwriting on small plaques, dedicating each gift to Jacob, but with a note to Dad, thanking me for carrying out his wishes. I felt a warmth I hadn't felt since his illness began. He had left the world better than he found it, and I had been entrusted to help make that happen. In the evenings, I often sit by the window with a cup of tea, looking out at the quiet street. The house is full of memories, some bittersweet, some joyful, but it's also full of life. Thanks to my son's foresight. I think about the moment Mrs. Thompson warned me, about the envelope Clara had handed me, about every instruction Jacob left. And I realize something profound. Though he is gone, Jacob's love, wisdom, and care continue to guide me every single day. I will never forget him. I will never forget the lessons he taught me, even in his final days. And most importantly, I will never forget that the true inheritance isn't money, nor land, nor possessions. It is love, trust, and the foresight to do what is right even when no one else will. As the sun sets over the quiet neighborhood, I whisper to the wind, "Thank you, Jacob. You've given me more than I could have ever imagined. And I will honor it, always." And in the silence that follows, I feel his presence, not in grief, but in guidance, love, and the quiet satisfaction of a life carefully lived and carefully remembered. Please subscribe, like, comment, and share. Thank you very much for watching.